Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Throwback Thursday, where we investigate the con men from old to learn lessons for our modern era. Today, we're taking a look at the grandpappy of Ponzi schemes, Bernie Madoff. He ran a $64.8 billion scheme before it was discovered in 2008 by himself. He turned himself in. That's probably the first shocking thing you need to know about Bernie Madoff, is that his Ponzi scheme was trucking along until the financial market collapsed in 2008 and everyone came looking for their money. Now, if you understand how a Ponzi scheme works, where you're constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul, you're not actually investing the money, you understand why this is a problem. He simply didn't have it. He didn't have those magical 1% per month returns that he had been promising people for years. That while the S&P 500 was going up and down with the market, they could trust him with their finances. And why not? After all, he was the former chairman of the NASDAQ. He was a well-known market maker. He was known within Wall Street. He was royalty. And so people just trusted him. He didn't go looking for investors. They came to him. His investment advisory was, quite frankly, one of the most elite clubs to be in. You had to know somebody who knew Bernie to get into his Ponzi scheme. So at first, hearing all these things, you may be envisioning some brilliant, genius con men who simply outsmarted the feds, outsmarted the authorities, who were just befuddled by how this could be right up until the very end. But you'd be wrong. See, Bernie didn't evade suspicion. In fact, almost his entire career, he was being investigated by the SEC or other regulatory agencies. So the real question is not how did a bunch of people fall for a Ponzi scheme, but how did we let it happen? My theory, Bernie made a big bluff.
When this is something that the public really doesn't understand, and if you read things in the newspaper and you see somebody, violate a rule, you say, well, they're always doing this. But it's impossible for you to for a violation to go undetected.
Now, obviously, we know what he just said is incredibly ironic, but it's also factually untrue. He literally got away with his Ponzi scheme for several decades. But this wasn't because Bernie Madoff was some genius fraudster. In fact, I want to share with you 3 examples from when Bernie Madoff almost got caught. He was always, it seems, almost getting caught, to illustrate to you the absolute incompetence we were dealing with the SEC. My first example, the 1992 investigation. According to a report into the SEC's failure to catch Madoff, in June of 1992, several customers of an investment firm known as Avellino and Bynes approached the SEC conveying concerns about investments they had made. The SEC was provided with several documents that indicated that they were offering 100% safe investments. Now, what did the SEC suspect that this company was doing when they heard about high and extremely consistent rates of return? Well, they suspected them of operating a Ponzi scheme, but later realized that Madoff, Bernie Madoff, had taken complete control over their customers. Now, what does the SEC do? They suspect this company, this investment company that's selling these high consistent returns, of running a Ponzi scheme. They find out that Madoff manages all their funds. So what do? Well, they shut down this company, which they suspect of being a Ponzi scheme. But do they investigate Madoff for being a Ponzi scheme? No. In fact, in a Wall Street Journal article from 1992, this is written about how basically there was a mystery investor. It says the mystery broker turned out to be none other than Bernard Madoff, a highly successful and controversial figure on Wall Street. In a stroke of what could be described as unfortunate irony, it says in the article, regulators feared it might all just be a huge scam. This is 16 years before the Ponzi falls apart. We went into it thinking it could be a major catastrophe, says Richard Walker, the SEC's New York regional administrator. Really? You thought it could be a scam? No. It was a scam. You just didn't look. So that's exhibit 1 of the SEC's enormous incompetence. But now I want to draw you to the refrigerator. This is much later in the fraud. So apparently KPMG was looking for a document that they had not known was going to be asked for. So this guy testifies, now I have a big problem. These guys are looking for non-existent records, right? Because they're not a real trading company. Normally, you could provide this, but they don't actually trade. their Ponzi scheme. And so this is how like haphazard the Madoff organization was at this point. He calls downstairs to two of the guys down there and says, hey, bring me up such and such report. I need it in 10 minutes. Knowing that this report, it doesn't exist. So the guys downstairs, they have to make it up literally from scratch. And they know that, oh, it's going to be hot. You know, this is supposed to be a well-worn report. It's good, but it's going to be hot. It's supposed to be from years ago. It doesn't exist. So they put it in the refrigerator to cool it down because the guys are right upstairs. They need to bring it up. And then they toss it around like, quote, a medicine ball. Picture that. These guys tossing around a newly created fraudulent document like a medicine ball so it would seem like it's worn. And they bring it upstairs and present it. And nobody is the wiser. Now, is that the story of some brilliant, fraudster? No. That's a guy who can barely get it together. That's an organization that is on the brink of falling apart. And yet, once again, they live to fight another day. Up till now, nobody's really seriously looked into the Bernie Madoff fraud possibility until one man named Harry Markopolos appears on the scene. According to him, he looked at Bernie Madoff's books, and in 5 minutes, he knew the whole thing was a fraud. In 4 hours, a Ponzi scheme.
And Harry said, this is a fraud. And then 4 hours later, he says, this is a Ponzi scheme.
So what do you do if you're Harry Markopolos and you realize that one of the largest hedge fund managers on Wall Street is actually a fraudster? Well, you take it to the SEC, of course. And they ignored him. Why did they ignore him, you ask? That's a great question. See, obviously, the OIG investigated the SEC. Everyone's investigating, themselves, did no wrong. And the reason they didn't take Harry Markopolos' claim seriously is because how could Bernie Madoff be a Ponzi scheme if he was trading in Europe? That's why they dismissed Harry Markopolos. He showed them mathematically that it was impossible to do what Bernie Madoff was doing. And they said Mr. Markopolos did not know that the trades were done in Europe. So they dismissed him. Now, did Bernie Madoff trade in Europe? Apparently, as the story goes, Madoff had his office set up in such a way that whenever investigators asked to see evidence of this trading, one trader would sit at the desk showing that they're trading with Europe, while the guy down the hall would execute the European side of the trade. So they literally had it set up in such a way that two guys are in the same building just sweating, I imagine, hoping that these regulators will simply go away. So the SEC sees that and goes, oh, I guess that's legit. And at that point, you have to wonder, what are they going to find? Well, nothing. Time after time, the SEC bungles the case. They just slips out of their hands. At one point, they have this thing where they're going to seek records from something called the Depository Trust Company, which is an independent third party. And they ask Madoff for his account number, whatever. He gives it to them. And he says at that point, Monday morning, they'll call the DTC and it'll be over. Basically, he goes, my time is up. He knew it, except that never happened. Why? Because they never called the place to verify the trades. Literally at every corner, the SEC is just falling over themselves to miss the largest Ponzi scheme in human history. And the question is, again, how? I have a few answers at my disposal here, and I'm going to give you my own answer as well. One is what Harry Markopolos believed. He said, I believe that the one overarching deficiency is that the SEC is a group of 3,500 chickens tasked to track down and catch foxes, which are way faster, stronger, and smarter than they are. The SEC itself says that they think that the teams assembled to investigate Madoff were, quote, inexperienced and there was insufficient planning for the examinations. Now, those are good theories. Harry Markopolos also says that he thinks that the SEC has too big of a conflict of interest with Wall Street and with Madoff, and that's maybe one of the reasons why. And I think that's possible, but I think there's something else going on here too. See, with someone like Bernie Madoff, you have an emperor has no clothes problem, where someone is so powerful, someone is so experienced and well known within their industry that it becomes almost unfathomable that they will be caught. And I think that Bernie's big bluff was not to go ahead and make the most sophisticated financial con in human history. It was that I think he knew that if he dressed the part, he looked the part, and played the part well enough, nobody would bother looking. After all, how could you fathom that the guy who's saying this,
when this is something that the public really doesn't understand, and if you read things in the newspaper and you see somebody, violate a rule, you say, well, they're always doing this. But it's impossible for you to for a violation to go undetected.
how could that be the guy running the biggest Ponzi scheme in human history? Can't be him. He's that nice, well-spoken guy who Uncle Bernie. He would do no harm. I think it was the sheer audacity of what he did that led so many people to simply sweep it under the rug, to not look too carefully. The people who suspected him, they even suspected him of a different crime entirely. They thought maybe he was front-running trades, right? Which is illegal, but the profits are real. They thought maybe he's committing a little bit of fraud, but not that much fraud. Nobody thought about a Ponzi scheme because, quite simply, it was outside the realm of possibility. That is what made Bernie's bluff so effective. So nobody looked into it. Nobody except someone looking at the numbers. Harry Markopolos was one of the few people to not only suspect Bernie Madoff, but also accuse him of running a Ponzi scheme before it all collapsed in 2008. And I think the lesson we can learn from this is to not simply look at the outside appearance of somebody just because they have a Lambo, just because they have a suit, just because they have, quote, millions of dollars, or even if they are respected by their peers or they appear to have connections. This does not preclude them from all sorts of insane behavior that we can't explain later on. I mean, it's all well and good to say that someone's a psychopath after the fact, but nobody was accusing Bernie of being a psychopath before the fact. Nobody knew it. And the only way you could have known at the time that Bernie was actually committing the fraud that he was not giving him the benefit of the doubt. And that is one of the craziest things to swallow. Because once you realize the most well-dressed, well-adjusted, wealthy people in the world can be psychopaths and you don't even know, that's a scary thought. So guys, I'd like to end this video on an upside. Justice was served in the end. The 3,500 chickens Harry Markopolos talked about eventually came home to roost. But if you're out there and you want to be safe, don't invest in something you don't believe in. Bernie's saying was, just trust me, just trust me, just trust me with your money, right? You don't have to understand it. No, you do have to understand it. And if you're an investor today, it's all the more important. Just remember, Bernie's big bluff doesn't work if you call him. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.